When we encounter a person who seems hopelessly consumed by their own reflection, so entranced with their virtues and blind to their flaws, we may be tempted to confront them directly, to call them out, as we say. Yet to do so often yields not transformation but resistance. Why is this? And what then should we do? The heart of a narcissist is a fortress built on fragile ground. It is both towering and crumbling. Their pride serves as both a shield and a snare, protecting them from perceived slights, yet trapping them in a cycle of self-deception. If we attempt to storm this fortress with accusations, the defenses will rise higher, and the walls will grow thicker. But here lies the wisdom of divine counsel. We are not called to tear down such walls by force. Instead, we are called to mirror a different image, a truer one. When Christ spoke of humility, he did not demand it with harshness, but demonstrated it through servanthood and sacrifice. He met pride not with scorn, but with grace. What, then, does this look like in practice? First, resist the urge to fight fire with fire. To match arrogance with condemnation is to play a game that pride always wins. Instead, respond with quiet confidence and an unshakable sense of your own worth. Do not seek to prove the narcissist wrong, for their heart is not swayed by logic, but by love. Reflect on your own heart. Why does their behavior provoke you? Is it because you see in them a shadow of your own struggles with pride? Use this encounter as a mirror to examine your soul, asking for the strength to root out the seeds of self-centeredness that may also dwell within you. The nature of the narcissist heart. At its core, narcissism is a distortion of something fundamental to human nature, self-love. It is not the healthy kind of self-regard that allows us to value ourselves as creations of divine intent, but a warped and exaggerated form that elevates the self above all else. This excessive pride blinds the individual to their flaws and weaknesses, while inflating their virtues, whether real or imagined. To understand the heart of a narcissist is to recognize that their behavior is both a mask and a prisoner defense mechanism born of insecurity and a deep hunger for validation. The narcissist's self-image is precariously constructed. Beneath their outward display of confidence lies a vulnerability they dare not expose, even to themselves. It is this fragility that fuels their relentless pursuit of admiration. Like a person lost in a desert, desperately chasing mirages of approval, the narcissist is trapped in an unending quest to fill a void that no amount of external validation can satisfy. They seek to convince others, and more importantly, themselves, that they are unassailably superior. Yet this very pursuit isolates them, for authentic relationships cannot thrive on the brittle foundation of constant affirmation. What drives this behavior is pride, but not the noble kind that takes joy in one's accomplishments or abilities. It is pride unmoored from humility, a pride that cannot coexist with vulnerability or self-awareness. Scripture often warns against such pride, likening it to a downfall, a snare that ensnares the soul. The narcissist, in their relentless need to appear strong and untouchable, builds walls so high that even they cannot climb out. They are not only prisoners of their vanity, but also its most zealous guards. Pride, however, is not merely a personal failing, it is a spiritual distortion. It separates the individual from God and others by placing the self on a pedestal. The narcissist may not consciously think of themselves as divine, but their behavior reveals a kind of idolatry of the self. They measure their worth not by the intrinsic value bestowed by their creator, but by their ability to dominate, impress, or outshine others. This inversion of values leads to a perpetual cycle of dissatisfaction, as the applause they crave never truly satisfies the deeper longing for love and acceptance that only a higher power can provide. Ironically, the narcissist's actions often repel the very connection they desire. Their need to be admired eclipses their ability to empathize, leaving others feeling used or discarded. Relationships become transactional, based on what others can provide in terms of praise or utility. This hollowness is not lost on the narcissist, though they may deny it. Somewhere beneath the surface, they sense the emptiness of their pursuits, but to confront this truth would be to risk the collapse of the persona they have carefully constructed. From a spiritual perspective, this condition is tragic not because it is hopeless, but because it reveals how far the human heart can wander when disconnected from its source. Pride in its extreme form blinds the individual to their need for grace. The narcissist sees themselves as sufficient, yet this self-sufficiency is an illusion. They are like a branch severed from the vine, desperately trying to bear fruit on their own. The result is frustration, bitterness, and a perpetual striving that never leads to peace. Understanding this dynamic helps us approach the narcissist with compassion rather than condemnation. Their behavior, as frustrating or hurtful as it may be, is not merely a choice but a symptom of a deeper spiritual struggle. They are, in a sense, lost souls who have mistaken the adoration of others for the love they truly need. This does not excuse their actions, but it places them in the broader context of human fallibility and the universal need for redemption. The narcissist heart reveals something about all of us. While their pride may be extreme, it is not entirely alien. Who among us has not sought approval or validation, or struggled with self-centeredness in some form? The narcissist's exaggerated flaws serve as a mirror, reflecting the subtle ways pride operates in our own lives. Recognizing this can be both humbling and instructive, reminding us to examine our own hearts, even as we seek to understand theirs. The nature of the narcissist heart is a poignant example of how good things like self-love and confidence can become twisted when they are detached from their proper context. Self-love, when guided by humility and grounded in the recognition of our dependence on God, is a source of strength and dignity. But when it becomes the sole focus, it turns inward, consuming rather than sustaining. Understanding this helps us respond to narcissism, not with judgment, but with a wiser and more compassionate approach, one that acknowledges the deep spiritual wounds at the root of their behavior. Wisdom in response. Responding to a narcissist requires a delicate balance of grace, discernment, and self-control. Direct confrontation, though tempting, often proves counterproductive. Narcissists are deeply resistant to criticism, no matter how valid or gently expressed. Their identity is so tightly bound to their perception of superiority that any challenge to this image feels like an existential threat. This defensive posture often results in deflection, denial, or even retaliation. To engage with them wisely, one must set aside the impulse to win or to force recognition of their flaws and instead embrace a strategy rooted in patience and humility. At the heart of wisdom in response is the understanding that you cannot argue someone out of a deeply ingrained belief about themselves. Narcissists thrive in environments where attention, whether positive or negative, is focused on them. Calling out their behavior directly often feeds this dynamic, as it keeps the spotlight firmly on them and validates their perception of themselves as central to the situation. In many cases, they are less interested in truth than in maintaining control over how they are perceived. Therefore, a wise response involves stepping outside the expected pattern of confrontation and disengaging from the narcissist's need to dominate the narrative. One effective approach is to practice emotional neutrality. Narcissists often seek reactions from others, using anger, frustration, or even despair as evidence of their ability to influence and control. By maintaining calm and refraining from overt emotional responses, you deny them the reinforcement they seek. This does not mean suppressing your feelings entirely, but rather cultivating a sense of internal steadiness that allows you to respond thoughtfully instead of reactively. Such composure can disarm the narcissist and shift the dynamic in a way that prevents escalation. But another crucial aspect of wisdom in dealing with narcissists is setting boundaries. Narcissists are prone to overstepping limits, whether by monopolizing conversations, dismissing others' perspectives, or demanding undue attention. Without clear boundaries, their behavior can become increasingly intrusive and harmful. However, boundaries must be enforced firmly yet respectfully. Rather than attacking the person, focus on the specific behavior and how it affects you. For instance, saying, "I need to end this conversation because it's becoming unproductive," communicates your limits without inviting a defensive response. The goal is to protect your well-being while avoiding unnecessary conflict. Equally important is the ability to choose your battles. Not every slight or manipulative tactic warrants a response. Narcissists often use provocation as a tool to draw others into arguments or drama that serve their need for attention. By learning to discern which issues genuinely require engagement and which can be let go, you can conserve your energy and prevent yourself from being pulled into unproductive conflicts. Silence, in many cases, can be more powerful than words. It signals that you are not easily swayed or manipulated, which subtly undermines the narcissist's control. Listening is another tool of wisdom, though it may seem counterintuitive at first. While narcissists often dominate conversations, genuinely listening to them without feeding their need for validation can sometimes reveal underlying insecurities or concerns. When done skillfully, listening can create a space where the narcissist feels heard without feeling empowered to exploit the interaction. This approach requires discernment to avoid reinforcing their inflated sense of self while still demonstrating empathy. Part of responding wisely also involves examining your own motivations. What is it about the narcissist's behavior that compels you to react? Often our responses to narcissists are influenced by our own insecurities or unmet needs. For example, if their arrogance irritates you, it may reflect a struggle with feeling undervalued or overlooked in your own life. Recognizing these triggers allows you to respond from a place of self-awareness rather than defensiveness. It shifts the focus away from the narcissist and toward your own growth, enabling you to handle interactions with greater clarity and purpose. Practical wisdom also involves seeking external support. Narcissists can be highly manipulative, and their behavior may cause confusion or self-doubt. Speaking with trusted friends, mentors, or counselors can provide valuable perspective and reinforce your sense of reality. These outside voices serve as anchors, helping you navigate the complexities of dealing with narcissistic individuals without losing your sense of self. Wisdom in response acknowledges that change is not guaranteed and ultimately not within your control. Narcissists are unlikely to change unless they recognize the need for transformation themselves, and even then, the process is often long and arduous. Your role is not to fix them, but to manage your interactions in a way that reflects integrity and protects your emotional health. This perspective frees you from the burden of responsibility for their growth while empowering you to act in alignment with your values. By practicing emotional neutrality, setting clear boundaries, choosing when to engage, and focusing on your own well-being, you embody the wisdom that God calls us to in dealing with difficult individuals. Such responses reflect not only a commitment to peace, but also a deeper understanding of human nature and the limitations of our influence over others. Spiritual transformation. Dealing with narcissism, whether in others or recognizing it within ourselves, is an opportunity not only for personal growth but for spiritual transformation. The process of engaging with narcissistic behaviors, whether we are on the receiving end or observing them in someone else, is intrinsically connected to the way we understand and respond to the higher moral teachings that guide us. The presence of narcissism offers a mirror, reflecting both the challenge of self-deception and the potential for divine redemption. It becomes a test of our ability to cultivate virtues such as patience, humility, and grace, which are not merely moral guidelines but spiritual disciplines designed to align our hearts with a higher purpose. One of the most profound aspects of dealing with narcissism is the realization that it is often a symptom of spiritual emptiness. The narcissist's overwhelming need for admiration and validation stems from a deeper void, a lack of true fulfillment that cannot be filled by external applause. In this sense, narcissism reveals the struggle for identity and belonging, where the pursuit of self-aggrandizement replaces the pursuit of communion with God and others. For those who encounter narcissism, whether through direct interaction or observation, there is an invitation to recognize the emptiness that underlies such behaviors and to engage in a different kind of pursuit, the pursuit of spiritual wholeness. The response to narcissism, therefore, offers us a chance for transformation that goes beyond mere tolerance or self-protection. It calls for the kind of self-examination that confronts our own spiritual wounds. When we encounter someone who exhibits narcissistic traits, we may be quick to judge or distance ourselves from them, but such behavior often reflects an inner discomfort with our own imperfections. Narcissism, whether in ourselves or others, functions as a mirror, reflecting the ways in which we too may place too much stock in external approval, may struggle with humility, or may be driven by pride. The spiritual transformation begins with this recognition. To deal with narcissism effectively, one must first look inward. What is it that makes us react with frustration or anger? What does the narcissist trigger in us? This self-awareness is not meant to lead to guilt or self-criticism, but to a clearer understanding of the areas of our own hearts that require healing. When we engage with someone whose pride is evident, it challenges us to examine the ways in which our own pride operates. We are reminded that narcissism is not always overt. It can manifest in subtle forms, such as the desire to control situations or the fear of being overlooked. By acknowledging our own tendencies towards self-centeredness, we begin the process of spiritual growth. This process of self-examination naturally leads to the next step in spiritual transformation: humility. The ability to engage with narcissism without feeling the need to confront or criticize comes from a deep well of humility. Humility is not a denial of our worth or the truth of our experiences. Rather, it is the willingness to place others' needs above our own, to resist the urge to prove ourselves, and to accept that we cannot control the actions or attitudes of others. When we respond to narcissism with humility, we are not only modeling Christ-like behavior, but also inviting an opportunity for personal growth. Humility allows us to stand firm in our values without seeking recognition or applause. It frees us from the need to control or dominate interactions and instead teaches us to act with integrity, regardless of how our actions are received. Responding to narcissism through spiritual transformation requires the practice of grace. It is easy to become frustrated with narcissists, to judge them harshly, or to harbor resentment when their actions cause harm. Yet grace, as a divine gift, calls us to offer mercy even when it is undeserved. Grace does not condone harmful behavior, but it extends the opportunity for change and healing. To practice grace in the face of narcissism is to resist the temptation to retaliate or punish, but to seek the well-being of the other, even when they seem unreachable. This is a reflection of God's grace toward us, which is extended without condition, even when we are far from deserving. In responding with grace, we not only honor the divine nature of forgiveness, but also liberate ourselves from the burden of bitterness and resentment. A key aspect of spiritual transformation in this context is recognizing that the change we seek in others is not ours to force. The narcissist's transformation, if it is to occur, must come through their own recognition of their need for healing and growth. Our role is not to change them, but to live out a model of humility, grace, and truth. By doing so, we create an environment in which transformation becomes possible. This does not mean we passively endure abuse or neglect our boundaries. Rather, we engage with others from a place of strength that comes from our trust in God, knowing that true change is ultimately in His hands. Engaging with narcissism offers us the opportunity to become more deeply rooted in our relationship with God. When we respond to narcissistic behaviors with love, patience, and wisdom, we are called to draw from a source that transcends human understanding. This is not about mustering the strength to endure difficult people, but about surrendering to God's strength in us. It is through Him that we find the ability to love those who are difficult to love, to extend grace to those who are not seeking it, and to remain grounded in truth, even when faced with distortion. The practice of these virtues becomes a pathway to spiritual maturity, as each interaction, each challenge, becomes an opportunity to reflect more fully the character of Christ.